So I've got a question here from Jean Kelty, and I think it's a really good question. Jean says, one thing I've always wondered about is the fact that in the Renaissance, paintings of biblical subjects, including the life of Christ, in those pictures, the people depicted are often dressed in contemporary clothes. This would be the equivalent of a painter today depicting Jesus in jeans and a hoodie. Of course, as religion does not occupy us today to any comparable extent, artists in the West are mostly not painting religious subjects, but does the depiction of onlookers and participants in Renaissance paintings of biblical subjects imply something theological? Perhaps that the religious topics are dealing with present realities, that the message of the paintings is for contemporary viewers. This seems rather a modern idea to me. Perhaps they, unlike us, simply weren't interested in historical accuracy, ? I think this really very much goes to the centre of a particular view of the Christian religion and how to relate to the stories that it tells, which was much discussed by not just painters in the Renaissance and indeed earlier in the Middle Ages, going back to at least the 11th or the 12th centuries, but very much discussed in the church itself. And one of the main drivers of this impetus towards, as to put it in modern terms, making it new, making it now, making it fresh, making the story seem as if it's happening in the present day. One of the main drivers of that was Francis of Assisi, who responded very much to what he saw as an emergency to which Christ himself would have responded had he been there at that time, namely a great crisis that swept through Italy in Francis's time, which led to huge amounts of poverty and desperation. And Francis said to himself and to his followers, we must in every way, in our sermons, in our popular theatrical events that we will stage, and in the paintings that will be in Franciscan churches, we must bring it to people on their own terms. We must make them understand that these stories matter to them because these are the stories that can save them in the here and now. And what was implicit in that, essentially, all the way through, and you find it also in writings intended to encourage lay devotion in Northern Europe, in Flanders, and so on. Implicit in that is the idea that if these stories are to be made to live again and again for each new generation, they must be reclothed, not just in terms of clothing, but in terms of topicality. So, there's nothing wrong with having a painting of Christ feeding the multitude that makes reference to the multitudes outside Pisa today that need feeding. And if we make in a painting those multitudes in that Christ is feeding seem like those in Pisa today, then the people in Pisa today, when they look at the painting, they'll feel that this is a church that can help them. They will cleave to the message. And it fed through into all kinds of writings. I mean, Caravaggio is a great example of it. He revives this practice, which had fallen out of favour somewhat during the High Renaissance, when a great vogue for clothing the figures of religious story in generalised classical draperies that made everyone seem rather grand and rather vague and rather distant. Caravaggio brought it back again into modern reality. And when I wrote my book about him, I saw him very much as a kind of reviver of a tradition, as well as being a great innovator, because he was a great innovator in the painting of light and so on. But when it came to this, making it immediate, making it real, making it dramatic, making it seem as if it happens today, he was in a tradition. And I'm going to read you an example of the kind of texts that I've been referring to. I mean, I could have chosen a Franciscan prayer manual, I could have chosen the spiritual exercises of Ignatius Loyola, but this is actually a 15th century Venetian text called the Garden of Prayer. And it was a text about how to pray effectively. What do you do? How to summon up an image in your mind when you're praying. But it could be taken also as a guide to a painter trying to summon up an image for someone to look at. And the writer of this text says, the better to impress the story of the Passion on your mind and to memorize each action of it more easily. It's helpful and necessary to fix the places and people in your mind. A city, for example, which will stand for the city of Jerusalem. Take for this purpose a city that is well known to you and imagine the scenes taking place there. In that city find the principal places in which all the episodes of the Passion would have taken place. For example, a palace in your chosen city. That will have the supper room where Christ had his last supper with the disciples. Choose another house for the house of Anne, and another for that of Caiaphas, with the place where Jesus was taken in the night. And then too you must shape in your mind some people, and choose people who are well known to you, to represent for you the people involved in the Passion. Jesus himself, the Virgin, St. Peter, St. John the Evangelist, St. Mary Magdalene, Anne, Caiaphas, Pilate, Judas, and the others, every one of which you will fashion in your mind, basing them all on people whom you know. And this is exactly what Caravaggio did when he was painting a picture. He chose models. He did central casting. You look like St. Peter in my mind. You look like Judas. But this was a very long tradition, and it did indeed, Jean, sorry, I forgot your first name for a moment. It did indeed, Jean, have a very, very strong theological point. And I think the essential point of it is that the idea that the stories of the Bible are forever happening again and again, maybe in different forms, and they'll happen in a different form in your life than they did in another lifetime. But they're always here, they're always with us, they are always relevant, they're always modern, and that's why they're in modern dress.